Welcome to the Unfading Truth Bible reading plan. Today we're reading Deuteronomy chapter 9, verses 4 through 6. You belong to God, but don't get too cocky about it. Deuteronomy chapter 9, remember here the context of Deuteronomy is it's comprised of the advice that Moses gives to Israel on God's behalf right before they enter into the promised land. Let's start reading here in chapter 9, verse 4. After the Lord your God has driven them, that is the wicked nations, out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. No, it is on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you're going in to take possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God will drive them out before you to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. Well, the first point of the canons of Dort is that God has unconditionally elected us to salvation. That is, he unconditionally chose us for the salvation that we've received. This week we're working our way through article number 9, which states that God's election, God's choice, was not based on foreseen faith. It says that your election, God's choice of you for salvation, that took place not on the basis of foreseen faith, and not on the basis of obedience or holiness or any other good quality and disposition that God could somehow see in you in the future, as though God's choice was based on a prerequisite cause or condition in the person to be chosen. Rather, God's election of you took place for the purpose of faith and obedience and holiness and so on. Accordingly, election is the source of every saving good. Faith, holiness, and all of the other saving gifts, and even eternal life itself, all of that flows forth from election as its fruits and effects. Well, I once received an upgrade to fly first class. Now, I didn't get that upgrade because I paid more for my ticket, but because the flight was oversold and somehow I was the lucky guy who got to move up to the empty first class seat to make room for the others and back in steerage. But even though I hadn't done anything to deserve such an honor, well, I still felt a certain smugness getting to board before the others, and I sat there in my plush seat nursing a complimentary beverage while pretending not to notice the serfs filing by me towards economy. Somehow I was better than them. Well, for that moment at least. Well, that's exactly the attitude that the Lord warned his people of here as they prepared to evict the pagan Canaanites and take their homes and land. God knows our nature, and he knew the likelihood that sooner or later his people, former Egyptian slaves, his people would associate God's gift of freedom and land as being conditioned upon their own righteousness and integrity. But God makes it abundantly clear that their righteousness had nothing to do with it. They couldn't have possibly earned a right to live in the promised land, God coldly tells them, because they were a stiff-necked people. God explains exactly why the Canaanites were evicted and that the Israelites would take possession. It was on account of the wickedness of the nations that the Lord drove the Canaanites out. But the new residents didn't get to move in because somehow they were better, but because the Lord was accomplishing what he swore to their fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In other words, God was keeping his promise. Let's dig a little bit deeper. These 5 doctrines of grace that we've begun unpacking this year are known by a famous acronym, TULIP. These canons, though, which were written in Latin, they don't follow that particular order, which is why we've started the year with the letter U, which stands for unconditional election. This foundational point that God's election of a particular people to salvation was not conditioned on us being any better, less guilty, or more righteous than those whom God passed over. This is actually the longest of the 5 points. In many ways, this first point is the toughest pill for us to swallow, and therefore it needs the most explanation, since we have such a strong intuition to want to somehow think that we've earned this honor. It's often said that we'll never know why it is that God chose us for salvation, and there's certainly truth in that statement. But we can be a bit more precise. And our passage here today helps us understand exactly why God saved you. He saved you because you're a member of his covenant. The same covenant that the Lord swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This means that God has legally obligated himself to you. Now, what you don't know is why God chose you in particular to be part of his covenant people. But you can know for sure that his choice was certainly not conditioned by anything that you have done or will do in your lifetime. Your election is completely based in God's grace. Well, as you pray today, use the AAA prayer pattern. That's where you begin your prayer by acknowledging who God is. Today, open your prayer to our Father, who is faithful to accomplish what he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then as you pray, go on to align your life with God's will. Pray that as you come to understand God's election more, you will grow more humble and less conceited that he's chosen you to be part of his covenant people. Then you can ask God for what it is that you need. Remember, everything else that you hear today will fade away, but the word of the Lord is unfading truth.